I am a colonel of the Wehrmacht, and I will not take orders to dig in the dirt from you or anyone else.
That was the precise posture, the absolute unyielding arrogance radiating from the captured German officer standing in the freezing mud of the Ohrdruf concentration camp in April of 1945. He looked at the standard-issue American entrenching tool being shoved toward his chest by a United States military policeman, and he crossed his arms tightly over his pristine, perfectly tailored gray uniform. He was a field-grade officer, a product of the elite German military academies, and he genuinely believed that the Geneva Convention, his aristocratic bloodline, and his inherent cultural superiority protected him from the degrading peasant work of manual labor. Type the word arrogance in the comments right now if you can already feel your blood boiling at the sheer audacity of a man demanding respect and special treatment in the absolute epicenter of human evil. Because standing just a few yards away watching this sickening display of elitist delusion was General George S. Patton, the legendary commander of the American Third Army. And what Patton did in response to that refusal remains one of the most brutal, psychologically devastating, and completely necessary acts of justice in the entire history of the Second World War. To understand the absolute freezing fury vibrating beneath Patton's skin in that exact moment, you have to understand what Ohrdruf was and what it had just done to the American military consciousness. On April 4, 1945, the 4th Armored Division and the 89th Infantry Division of the Third Army had breached the gates of Ohrdruf, a notorious subcamp of the Buchenwald network, making it the very first Nazi concentration camp liberated by U.S. forces. When Patton arrived a week later to inspect the grounds alongside Generals Dwight D. Eisenhower and Omar Bradley, the smell of decaying flesh was so overpowering, so fundamentally offensive to human biology, that Patton, a man who had seen the slaughtered meat of 2 world wars, a man who had ridden through the unimaginable carnage of the Meuse-Argonne offensive and the frozen, bloody hell of Bastogne, walked to the side of a wooden barracks and violently threw up. The camp was a nightmare rendered in physical architecture. The SS guards, before fleeing the rapid American armored advance, had callously machine-gunned thousands of starving, emaciated prisoners, leaving their bodies stacked like cordwood in the central courtyard. There were smoldering pyres of half-burned corpses, the grim evidence of a frantic, pathetic attempt to erase the monumental sins of the Third Reich before the Allied tanks rolled over them. This was the environment, the literal open graveyard of innocent thousands, in which this captured German colonel looked at an open mass grave and decided his primary concern was keeping his manicured hands clean. The colonel's refusal was not just a personal quirk of stubbornness. It was the final, desperate gasp of an ideology that had plunged the entire globe into darkness for 12 bloody years. The German officer class was built on the centuries-old Prussian military tradition, a deeply codified system of status, class, and aristocratic entitlement that dictated every aspect of their existence. According to the detailed historical analysis of the Wehrmacht's institutional culture, these senior officers did not just consider themselves militarily superior to their enemies, they considered themselves to be a categorically different higher breed of human being. They had eagerly accepted and weaponized the Nazi mythos of the master race because it perfectly aligned with what their military academies had been telling them for generations. Even now, with his country reduced to smoking rubble, with the Soviet Red Army closing its steel jaws around Berlin and the American military occupying his hometowns, this colonel's identity was so rigid, so deeply entrenched in the delusion of his own supremacy, that he refused to touch a shovel. He cited military protocol. He demanded to be treated as a gentleman of war. He was clinging to the polite rules of civilized combat while standing knee-deep in the undeniable evidence that his regime had abandoned human civilization entirely. Word of the standoff reached Patton almost immediately. The military police were temporarily unsure how to proceed. The international laws of war regarding the treatment of prisoners were strict, and a field-grade officer flatly refusing a direct order presented a logistical and legal headache that junior enlisted men were not equipped to handle. But General Patton was not operating in the realm of standard logistics or polite legalities that morning. Eyewitness accounts from the Third Army staff present at the camp note that Patton did not scream. He did not fly into one of his famous, profanity-laced theatrical rages. His anger had gone entirely cold, freezing over into something far more dangerous. He walked over to the standoff, his polished cavalry boots sinking into the exact same foul mud as the prisoner's bare feet had, and he looked the German colonel up and down. He saw the immaculate tunic. He saw the soft hands. He saw a man whose interior relationship with his own entitlement was completely untouched by the apocalyptic reality of the defeat surrounding him. Patton spoke in a voice so quiet, so measured, and so sharp that it cut through the bitter April wind like a surgical scalpel. He told the American MP to take the shovel back. He agreed, with dripping, lethal sarcasm, that a man of the colonel's distinguished rank and delicate sensibilities shouldn't be treated like a common, everyday laborer. Type the word incoming in the comments right now if you know exactly what happens when a commander like Patton gets quiet, because the storm that followed was engineered to completely destroy this man's soul. Patton turned back to the colonel and delivered a sentence that bypassed the Geneva Convention entirely and struck directly at the rotten heart of the Nazi superiority complex. The colonel was not going to be sent to a comfortable holding facility in the rear. He was not going to dig a single symbolic grave for the cameras. He was going to take that shovel, and he was going to dig until the American commander decided he had learned the fundamental value of the human lives his country had systematically extinguished. Patton gave strict, uncompromising orders to the heavily armed American soldiers standing guard. The colonel was to be given no gloves whatsoever. He was not permitted to remove his tailored heavy officer's tunic, despite the physical exertion. And 2 combat-hardened infantrymen with M1 Garand rifles were to stand directly behind him with the safeties clicked off. The instruction from the commanding general of the United States Third Army was explicitly clear and brutally simple. If the German officer stops digging, if he complains about the blisters, if he hesitates for even a fraction of a second, you shoot him exactly where he stands and you throw his body into the hole he just dug. There would be no military tribunal. There would be no diplomatic protest to the Red Cross. There was only the dirt, the shovel, the loaded rifles, and the absolute crushing authority of the conquering army. Confronted with the immediate, undeniable threat of summary execution, the aristocratic facade instantly shattered. The colonel took the shovel. He stepped down into the trench, and he began to dig. For the first hour, he tried desperately to maintain his military bearing, using the tool awkwardly, his body entirely rejecting the unfamiliar, degrading strain of heavy manual labor. But the earth at Ohrdruf was unforgiving, and the American guards, eyes burning with the memory of the starved bodies they had just found, did not let him rest for a single moment. By the second hour, the painful blisters on his soft, aristocratic hands had burst open, slicking the wooden handle of the entrenching tool with his own blood. By the fourth hour, the pristine, spotless gray uniform of the so-called master race was soaked through with sweat, caked in heavy mud, and permanently stained with the grim reality of the death camp. The proud, unyielding posture of the Prussian officer completely collapsed, bending him double under the physical agony of the work and the terrifying psychological weight of his new reality. He was weeping. He was shivering uncontrollably. He was forced to physically pull the emaciated, brutalized corpses